All right, guys. Anthony here from Austin Historical Lords Guild here with Andreas. Again, diving more into Jude Lew, Das Fechtbook. Tonight, starting from page 135, digging into the Shealer. Excuse me. The Shealer breaks what Buffalo strikes or thrusts. A threat with a Vexel is bereft with a Shielhow. So that's the Zettel, the gloss. The gloss is that know that the Shielhow is a remarkably good and serious piece. It bursts in forcefully with strikes and with thrusts, and is done with the inverted sword. Because of this, many masters of the sword do not have anything to say about the strike. And, in brackets, the strike breaks, also the guard which is called the flug. Item, do the Shealer as follows. When you approach the opponent in the Zufechten, put the left foot forward and hold your sword at your right shoulder. If he strikes above at you to the head, then turn your sword and jump forward with your right foot. Strike against his strike with the short edge out of stretched arms, over his sword toward his head and chest. All right, so it's a lot to break into. Going to the first half, it talks about breaking, in the gloss, in the Zettel itself, rather. Breaks with Buffalo strikes or thrusts. Buffalo is kind of now known as being someone who fights more with power, more with force than any kind of art or skill. So Vexelhoud beats someone who's bigger and stronger than you, assuming they're not fencing tactfully or soundly or with technique. So I'm approaching the Zufechten, left foot forward, sword at my right shoulder. So like we talked about from the Zwerkau, I'm going to be reading that as not above on my shoulder, but off to the side at, because I really liked how that worked with Zwerkau. So I'm curious to see how that feels with the Shielhow. He strikes above at you to the head, turning my sword, jumping forward with my right foot. Striking with outstretched arms, with the short edge, striking with short edge out of stretched arms, over his sword, towards his head or chest. So playing with that, he cuts in at me. I'm inverting that sword, striking over, striking through. And I will say almost immediately, starting on this wide position versus this shoulder cock position I'm more used to fencing from, this feels a whole lot better. And the other thing I'm finding myself doing in these opening iterations is kind of really listening to the idea of turning my sword. Turn your sword and jump forward to my right foot. So I'm really not trying to make a cut happen. I'm not kind of turning my sword and cutting with my false edge at his blade anymore. Kind of sitting here, and I'm turning my sword toward him, and I'm not trying to make that strike, not trying to make that hit, but instead I'm just turning my blade across as I spring, and I'm just beating him to this position. And again, playing it like this, it's really going for me back to 133. And again, that second warden breaking second of, if you're here, if they come in to break your siege properly, I'm not throwing any kind of cut. I'm just placing my sword across to kind of shut them down. And it really feels like I'm doing the exact same thing here with a longsword now in two hands. So as he comes in, I'm coming this wide across and really pressing this down, breaking this down. And the force of my motion, of my hips, of my spring, is to displace his cut. Right? I'm really driving this here. And then from the outstretched arms, I'm making this cut to his body, to his chest. How's that feeling?
Awesome. I mean, bad for me.
Right. So as he comes in, I'm really thinking out with my sword, and then I'm going to drop that cut with that false edge from those outstretched hands. I don't want to say as an afterthought, but definitely as an afterthought, as a secondary intention, secondary action. So, yeah, strike against his sword, strike against his strike with your short edge out of stretched arms, over his sword towards his head or chest. So in case he is prudent and changes through below you, blow while you miss him with the strike of your sword. Okay. In case he is prudent and changes through below while you miss him with the strike of your sword, then stay with the point with stretched arms. So this is really talking about from there, and we'll demonstrate that quickly. Yeah, so the point of the sword, stretched arms in front of his face.
Ugh.
Thus he may neither harm you nor come through below. So now as he changes through against my first opening intention, right, he's immediately stopped out. So a quick note, because we haven't talked about the change through this yet. So a few examples of what it could be, what we're kind of doing with it. So if we're in the bind and we're kind of pressing and fighting from here, the change through fairly widely accepted is kind of this drop my sword, come back up, right? Definitely effective, definitely matches the descriptions, things like that. The way I prefer to do it, prefer to teach it, is as he's pushing, I'm going to kind of pull back into this position and thrust through higher. So this gives me a little bit more control, a little bit more presence. It also is something that feels applicable, usable, doable against in the middle of a cut. So like when Andreas changes through against this cut here, as he does that cut, he's able to really easily, with that change through, come out of that cut and gets quick thrust in. If he tries to kind of drop and come through like the other way, it's a much harder cut for him to make. I have a lot more time to get myself forward and present against that. But regardless, it changes this idea that you drop, change lines, come up on the other side, and try to stab. But they're saying that with this idea of the shield how, that even if he changes through, because I'm not swinging at him anymore, but I can press my point out forward, keep it towards his face before he wants to commit and drive through. Or maybe he overcommits and stabs himself a little bit, and that's fine. Moving on. Item, another piece. When you stand against him, holding your sword at your right shoulder, and he sends the guard flug and threatens to thrust at you below, then strike long and above at him with his shield how with the short edge. Shoot the point towards his face or chest, thus he cannot reach you below with his thrust. So this is giving us a couple key parts and ideas of the shield how and kind of how to play with this. One of the things they haven't talked about here yet is overreaching or Überlaufen. And Überlaufen at its core is if he's trying to stab low and he's in a low position, even if he's extended out, going a low guard, my high thrust will beat his low thrust by a lot, right? I've got 6 or 8 inches of safety. He's got 6 or 8 inches of steel. And I can exaggerate that by pulling my core, pulling my chest away, getting more distance for myself and my attack as well. So that idea of Überlaufen is this straight arms from the shoulder are going to be straight arms from the waist. And we're kind of tying this with the shield how. So that's kind of also telling us the shield how, at least in this instance and the one before, is that you kind of want straight arms at shoulder height. I'm not going above my head because that shortens my distance. Going long, I'm going forward with my shield how, short edge up. So playing with that, he stands before me in the guard of the flug. I'm coming in again at my shoulder, something that outside. I come with a shield how. I kind of just drop this point towards his face, and you can kind of see, right, I'm 3 inches away from him, and I'm perfectly safe to drive through with my attack. So not a whole lot to see him play with from that. Interestingly enough, this doesn't denote whether it's right or left flug, but instead, again, just kind of relies on that overreaching, straight arms, reaching out, reaching long. Lastly, under this item, another one. When you stand against him with your sword at your right shoulder, he stands against you with his sword in the guard flug and threats thrusting below. This time it's turn away his strike with the short edge long above to him. Thus cannot reach you below with a thrust. So it's definitely the same, but this one definitely feels like there's a sort of vor and knock difference. Also, I believe this one with the footnote. This also,
Probably in German.
yeah, follow the lacuna.
Yeah, it's almost the exact repetition of the first one.
Yeah.
I think it might be a mistake of some sort.
Yeah, so there's definitely theory about this being a mistake, but as I'm kind of reading this without the kind of extra knowledge of that, to me that kind of like, okay, so one's vor, one's not. The first one we just did, he's in flug, I go first. It doesn't matter what happens. He struck out, he's missed. So the second one, where it says I strike away his thrust, with my short edge, long above to him. So that's kind of a slightly different. This is kind of,
I think I
yeah. So this is him coming first. I'm kind of dropping this there, and then I go long high, right? So again, I kind of place that and then drive. Not really long. Let me read that again. See if I like that. So when you stand against him with your sword at your right shoulder, he stands against you in the sword in the guard flug and threatens to thrust at you from below. Turn to strike away with the short edge, long above to him. But you cannot reach you below with a thrust. So I'm wondering if there's a few other ways I can kind of deflect that, because I'm not like, it's working slow. I'm not convinced at speed. Like, this feels not the greatest in the world. If I start adding some sort of slip footwork, like, it's definitely getting me there. And what's kind of really working is that I'm wide and stepping this across, which allows me to come off and press through. I guess my kind of immediate concern, that side would be easier. Comes in from that side. That feels great. Right, so if he's coming in from left flug, I can just kind of bring this across. And honestly, if he's coming low, I'm just going back to that first one. And I feel like the difference here is more what he's targeting. If he targets high, this second one feels a lot better, right? So if you make those thrusts come in from below at my head, I can really just drive this across, and that feels good. If you're keeping that low, I don't need to. I just put that out there and make that cut. So I think that's kind of the unspoken. It's maybe why transcription error, or maybe just kind of implied, because again, these glosses are teaching devices. They're not, the full description, the full verse. So it could very well be that there's the assumption like he's stressing you from below when he stays low. So overreach. If he comes high, use your short edge to knock it away and drive through. And that definitely feels a lot better for my understanding of that. So again, just to hopefully drive this through, the first option we read, even though they read the same, if I'm going for, if he's targeting low, I just overreach. I don't care who goes first at this point. If I'm here, I can throw my shield how high, I can smack him in the head, in the face, get the point on line. If he's coming high with that same attack, I can push it aside and make my own attack in that same instance. And I think that's where those two fall out. It's not a vor knock thing like I initially suspected, but where is he targeting? If he targets low, I overreach. If he targets high, I displace and cut. With the same action, my action doesn't change at all. It changes how his blade interacts with mine. So moving on, squint if he is short against you. Dirk Vexelen defeats him. And this is definitely one of those parts where there's debate whether squint with the face or squint with your eyes, or do a squint and set up Dirk Vexels. And we'll kind of play with that a lot because I have mixed opinions on both of those. All right, so from the gloss, this is a lesson. When you approach him with the Zufectin, you shall squint with your eyes or look whether he is finishing short. Hear this about the shortness of the sword. When he does not stretch the arms far from him with a strike, he is shortened. When you position yourself in the guard elbow and he falls onto your sword, he is also shortened. If he is fencing from the opposite of flug, he is shortened as well. What was it? Yeah, that's flug. Every winding before the opponent is short 2. You shall change through against this kind of fencer. With this, you force them that they have to displace. Thus, you can strike freely and work with your sword or with wrestling. So a lot in there. And again, this is definitely saying on the squint with the face. But this isn't to deceive. This is like, look at your opponent and see what they're doing. And I feel like my personal philosophy, my personal belief is that the Shielhao, because it's long, is really good at changing through and displacing and moving as well. So the subtext here is long arms beat short arms. And that's been the subtext for a lot of these. If he's fencing from flug, he's got short arms. We just talked about that. If he goes low, you can defeat him. If he goes high, You can come over him with this shield how, and this idea that you should always be changing through and moving. And if we look at normal position here, right, we kind of talked about this. If I change through with a big long motion here, bad. If I kind of change through in this and I push back out, I'm back in that shield how position that we were just describing and talking about. And this position is great to change through from because I can do it very quickly, very easily. And I don't need to sacrifice my line. I can really move through, move around. So when he's fencing in Ox, when he's fencing in Flug, any of those positions, right, I want to engage. And look how much reach I have on him, right? Because his arms are back, he's shortened. I have his weak on my strong. I have my point on line. I can easily manipulate him. If he starts winding and twisting around and doing things, right, I just change through. And all of a sudden, he is stuck defending and moving and working from here. So I think there's definitely some sort of subtext to this. Like, yes, I'm squinting with my eyes. I'm looking like, what is he doing? I'm studying him. I'm going to see what he's doing. But also, oh, you're fencing short. You're up in these guards, these positions. So Ox or Flug, right? Oh, you're fencing short. I can do it by changing through. So I'm going to get out there with a shield how. And as you go to wind and displace and move, right? I've already won. Right? It's really easy for me to kind of make those adjustments, make those motions from the end position of a shield how. So yes, the book says explicitly squint with your eyes, but because it's in the shield how section, because we're talking about shield how and how to manipulate these things, I feel like we should be using shield hows to kind of exploit and take advantage of those options, those positions. Next one, let's see, probably the last one for the day is continuing on with the squinting to the see if they fence short. So another lesson. When you approach him in the Zufectin, you shall squint with your eyes whether he is fencing short against you. You shall reckon this. When he strikes at you and doesn't stretch his arms far from him with the strike, his sword is shortened. Change through happily against those fencers who fence short in such a manner. Do it from strikes and thrusts with the long point. Thus you will retain them at the sword so they cannot hinder you to come to a bind, and they will be beaten. So this is definitely in that same vein, same trend, same mindset, right? So instead of him throwing these nice long arm cuts, using those little tiny things, really, whippy, trying to control and bind and work from there. So, and again, if he's doing that, I see him doing that. Again, they're talking about coming to the long point and being able to change through, sitting with the eyes. But if you notice, any of these positions, if I'm extending myself out, I'm winding up in a shield how type position, which is, again, my point is out, my point is long, my arms are extended, all those other things. But if I can engage him from the open with a shield how, like, yes, like I should be using my eyes and seeing how he's fencing, but if I want to engage him in that, you can see how quickly he's in trouble as he's fencing from there. And notice he instinctively started to stretch his arms back out and kind of reclaim that space and fight from there. Where if he kept those kind of short T-Rex arms, these little tiny half cuts, it's just ends very quickly for him. So real quickly, trying to play that one more time. So you're fencing with short arms. Yeah. So here, and you can see, like already, I can just easily change out and control as he tries to cut and manipulate and move around from there. So that's kind of my take on that. And again, I really think, yes, it's in the very literal sense, like all I can say is, yes, look with your eyes and do these things. But it's attached to shield how section for a reason. There's more shield how plays that come after this. So there's kind of a pause in the middle. And it's relevant because the shield how sets us up for that. So it says play with that a lot better. So you don't need to do a shield how to take advantage of these things. But if you start those things with a shield how, with this long extended position, all these things that we're talking about become much easier. And once you're comfortable with it from the shield how, then you can start playing with it from other positions. But in the back of my mind, it always goes back to, I wind back up in this position anyway, right? This is a version of where I want to be. So I might as well just start there from a cut, from a strike that's threatening, and then work from there. So I hope that makes sense. Hope people are actually even watching this anymore at this point. I have no idea, but I'm enjoying it. And as long as Andreas comes out, we're going to keep doing this. As always, if there are comments, questions, or thoughts on this, definitely feel free, comment below, reach out through Facebook or email. Otherwise, guys, have a safe night, and we'll be back on Friday with some more. Thanks.